Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Georgia Game Developers Association. The following is part of a series of recordings made during the 2011 Southern Interactive Entertainment and Game Expo. In this session, Edward Kensinger presents Game-Changing Games, How the Military is Using Game Technology for Medical Education. The Georgia Game Developers Association now presents Edward Kensinger.
Go ahead and get this kicked off here. I'm Ed Kensinger. I'm from the Telemedicine Advanced Technology Research Center. Our headquarters is located at Fort Detrick, Maryland, but I actually work at the field office, the South Field Office, located at Fort Gordon, Georgia, which is right outside of Augusta. And we're located at Fort Gordon because throughout the years we've been involved in many telemedicine projects, and Fort Gordon happens to be the home of the Army Signal Corps, which, everything that we're doing with telemedicine, deployed troops, requires bandwidth, and they're the broad bandwidth provider for our deployed Army. In addition, we also have one of our Army Medical Centers is located there, Dwight David Eisenhower Army Medical Center, so we have access to a lot of medical researchers, which helps us with our overall research. I'm presenting this presentation on behalf of my director, Colonel Carl Friedel, and my deputy director, Colonel Ron Korpatich. They're both at Fort Detrick. This is my disclaimer. Have to have it. Basically, I am not a member of the military. I am employed by the Geneva Foundation, not-for-profit medical research organization, and I am loaned to the United States Army under what's called an Intergovernmental Personnel Act agreement, where the Geneva Foundation gives me to the Army to work projects on behalf of the Army. And in that role, I function just like a government employee. The big one here is I have no authority to negotiate for or obligate the United States government. So if I'm promising you a lot of money for the work that you're doing, I have no authority to do so.
How about just global peace?
Global peace, now that's something we're all working towards, but I can't guarantee it. And I have all the opinions that I discussed today, they're my opinions. Ed Kensinger's, not those of the United States Army. Hate that. Okay, our medical simulation team, Fort Detrick, is made up of several physicians, engineers, and project managers like myself. Tom Talbot, he is our director, if you will. He is the one who is leading our MedSim group. He is part of, there's a new funding stream coming out of Health Affairs. It's called the Joint Program Committee. 1 Alpha refers to medical simulation. And he is also the director of the Armed Forces Simulation Institute for Medicine. He's a pediatrician by training, but he's been a very active developer and geek for years, and he's very much into the gaming scenario. Basically, I want to give you a little history of where we've been, where we're going with Army funding, Army medical funding of simulations. Most of our funding comes from, obviously, Undersecretary of Defense for Health Affairs, as well as we have had a variety of fund streams come through in the past, which have included very large amounts from Congressional Special Interest funding. Used to be referred to as TORP, but the current situation with the United States government, funds are drying up everywhere. It's a very lean time for funding any type of initiatives. And you'll see in a couple minutes what we have funded in the past, but things are getting leaner as the days go by. But there's still quite a bit of funding to be had. Detrick, Telemedicine Advanced Technology Research Center, we're part of Medical Research and Material Command, which is a major command of the U.S. Army MedCom, Medical Command. We are an office, a special office that's been formed to deal with emerging technologies in the field of medicine, which includes everything from diagnostic imaging systems to medical simulation to various new splints, prosthetics. It's very wide-ranging. And although we're an Army organization, we have members of our staff that are Navy, Air Force. It services all of the DoD. Here's our mission statement: Sports Science and Engineering Technology. Ahead of program research. Typically in the military, you operate on requirements. Requirements are those things that you identify as there's a need, but then those requirements have to be validated through a very lengthy process that it's bureaucratic in nature, and we lean forward in the foxhole. We go out and see what's best and brightest coming out of industry, and we take it and we give it to the troops. We do studies with it. We do early fieldings just to see if this can improve the care in theater of those troops.
What would you call your organization? A research organization for that reason?
It is a research organization, but it's also a research management organization. We fund academic and industry partners because that's where really most of the innovation is coming from, and then we manage that research. So we have our own internal cell where we do research, but we're managing the majority of the research that's going on. That's our primary function, I would say, is management of research. Here's some of our strategic partnerships. Got an office on the West Coast, one out in Hawaii. Of course, my group down in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Augusta. Fort Detrick's our headquarters, and we even have someone at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Dr. Dave Lamb. He does a great job. This is the type of funding that we have awarded and managed during the last decade or so. $2.1 billion. As you notice, most of it is congressional special interest, which is the pork that everyone hates to hear. We're building a bridge to nowhere. Well, the bridge to nowhere, those things happen. Highway projects happen. Airports get built where maybe the need doesn't really need or exist. However, medical research also takes place, and the successes that have come out of the medical research component of the congressional special interest funding far, again, it makes the rest of the expenditures worthwhile. But again, because we've got a divided Congress, and right now the American public is very much against unnecessary spending, and some of our funding is suffering as well. These are our portfolios, and this is what we have funded over the past decade or so, from psychological health, human performance optimization, international health efforts, training and simulation, which that's Dr. Talbot, as I mentioned, biomonitoring technologies, advanced prosthetics, regenerative medicine. These are the areas that have, as a result of the current wars we're involved in particular prosthetics and regenerative medicine, and the resilience and reintegration have become real focal points for our existing funding. That with our returning population of troops, many of them have been wounded, and because of that, this is our focus area. However, health information technologies is also a very large area, going for a national health record. The NHIN project, National Health Information Network, it's a consortium designed to establish those standards where you can end up with a lifelong medical record, not only for our service members, but for every American. That way, it feeds into the insurance groups, the funding stream coming from Medicare, having a centralized repository for every patient that comes through the door of an emergency room would be a great benefit. How you get the disparate systems to talk to each other and one standard established that's the challenge. We already talked about that. The pork barrel spending, basically, it is an appropriation from a member of Congress that says these dollars will be applied to this group doing this research, and they hand it over to us to manage. SBIRs, STTRs. This is still a very viable option. These announcements come out in the broad agency announcements on our website through MRMC, and so there still are dollars available for groups to apply for, and you'll see the announcements that kind of barrels on. Augmentation funding. At one time we had a pot of money that came out of the Surgeon General's office where we could, if we saw a very promising technology that would not maybe fit into the SBIR or did not have a congressional, our director could then fund that effort for a limited amount of money, but it'd be seed money. And then EMT funding, that's the AIM at Advanced Medical Technologies Initiative. Those are Surgeon General's dollars that go directly to a member of the Army Medical Department or Navy Medical Department or Air Force Medical Department. And the key there with that is that your principal investigator has to be someone within the DoD. Now, we oftentimes will partner with academia and industry, so we may have the principal investigator may be a member of the DoD, but they'll take the funding and apply it completely to a civilian organization, either academia or industry, to execute that research. Yes, sir.
I've seen the SBIRs and STTRs. I'm interested in this sort of augmentation funding. How broad is the scope of sort of what you guys call telemedicine, all this? Because when I see the SBIRs, they seem to sometimes all over the place.
They do.
And I'd love to know from our perspective, is there like a broad brush definition of what it encompasses?
Well, it encompasses everything from, as an example, I got funding to do research into transmission rates of MRIs using the Army Signal Corps' combat net radios, if you will. It's their combat communications system. It's the Warfighter Information Network, and tactical, which is all broadband satellite, but then there's repeaters, going from point A to point B, wireless, either wireless or radio. And so I was funded through that initiative for that. That's one area. Another area, we've had people that have gotten funding for doing telepathology, putting in a high-speed pathology scanner at a very busy medical treatment facility, but they did not have the pathologists on site in order to do all the reading of their slides. So they would scan them, transmit them, get the read back very quickly within 24 hours, and that's also been funded. But it really is kind of all over the board. You'll see on the MRMC website, there will be areas of interest, current command interest, and that's kind of the roadmap of what you want to follow, and see if it fits with where your business is involved. And the Armed Forces Simulation Institute for Medicine, that's just standing up. It's been in existence about a year and a half, 2 years. That's Dr. Brett Talbot, and the Joint Program Committee 1A MedSim funding. There are dollars associated with that. Now, what announcements are going to be published this year, we're not positive. They put out an RFP last year. I believe the award was $15.3 million. It went to a collaborative group and for MedSim. And looking at medical simulation for training, you know, that it's always been that you have a staff physician training a resident who trains the other residents that in how to practice medicine. And is there consistency there? Yes. Are there boards that have to be taken that validate that consistency of training? Yes. But medical simulation and training, that it's a way of quantifying exactly what you're training your clinicians in each and every time. Okay, that basically the chief resident looking at what the residents are doing to, this is the simulation, you performed well in it, this is your grade. And basically demonstrated proficiency that can be measured each and every time. There was an IRT, integrated research team, created to actually look at this. 70 people were in it, blending of government, academia, industry, became the basis for the Tadrick MedSim portfolio. This slide turned out bad.
Yeah.
There we go. People get too fancy. Okay, basically we've gone the gambit from having a screen where you're looking at, you know, interactive multimedia to digitally enhanced mannequins, part-time trainers, and total immersion. The digitally enhanced mannequins or simulators, those have, the Army actually funded those back in the late 90s, and I actually ran one of these sim centers for a short period, and these simulators listed all the physiological responses of a human whenever they're exposed to a variety of medications and or interventions by the clinician. And they've continued to become more and more refined as time goes by. And every Army medical center currently has a sim center devoted to training our clinicians in ACLS. ATLS, not so much yet, coming up, advanced trauma life support. Not so much yet, because the ability to replicate human tissue through a simulation isn't quite there yet. That's the holy grail for medical simulation, is to be able to, you know, replace our animal models with a simulation. So, you know, you still see clinicians using the animals for a variety of different training scenarios. And so, but that is the holy grail. If you can create a replacement for human tissue or for live tissue, you will be anointed. Identification of the enabling technologies. There are a variety of those that lead to more research. We look at the components, and basically start with the enabling technologies, integrate them into the system, validate it so that it can be used across the board, not only Army, but other military medical training scenarios. And then whenever we have validated that these training scenarios are as mature as they're going to get, then we transition them to a program of record. That oftentimes you'll hear, of these good ideas that have reached maturity, and they're never make it into the classroom, or they never make it into the civilian sector. It's called the valley of death, for acquisition. You do the research, and you can't make it across to turning it into an economically viable product. That's something that making an economically viable product in the civilian sector is being able to have the market where you can make the sales and make the profits for the company to do this. Within DoD, if it becomes a program of record, that's economic viability. That is our.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you've used the terms training simulation a number of times.
Yes.
And emphasized that's a strategic focus.
Yes.
Even to the point of saying that you can come up with a replacement for live tissue.
Right.
That would be the great thing. But
yes.
I'm not sure how you understand the overlap of simulation and game.
Right.
Since they are potentially the same thing, but they are also potentially unrelated.
Exactly. And, whenever we talk about simulations, most of them are physical, able to touch, work on those simulations. But there's a blending that's taking place between the physical simulators and the virtual environment as well. There's a current project underway where we have the clinicians using a physical simulator that is as good as a simulator can be. It's got human features, but you really can't. It's not human. But then in the virtual world, there's basically you have the goggles on, and it adds definition to the simulator that's virtually applied to your mannequin, and it gives you either the injuries or the anatomy or the procedure that you're going to be using, tutorials. If you're going to be intubating a patient, this is the internal structure of the neck and throat. So as you're intubating, you're guiding the laryngeal scope into the patient's mouth, and this is what you're hitting. You hit an obstruction, and it actually shows up in the virtual world without you actually being able to see what you're hitting. Excuse me, with your actual simulator. So there's a blending of the virtual and the simulator.
This is a little bit of augmented reality. So all of these features are being projected onto the model, and the computer's picking up what features. Like that's probably more like a VR code or something.
Exactly.
Like a regular model.
Right. Exactly. And also there's gaming in the respect that there's complete virtual worlds where surgeons are going into putting the helmet on or the glasses, but they're actually using the simulators and haptic feedback to practice their suturing techniques and treating virtual patients in that manner. And so that's another area where it's more the gaming side versus the simulator side. I believe. Did I answer your question, sir?
I'm not sure. I mean,
Okay.
maybe some people in the audience could help too, but I do understand simulation, and
Yes,
I
sir.
understand how you're aspiring to high levels of excellence in simulation,
Yes.
so that you could get as close to the real procedure as possible.
Yes.
But where I'm a little fuzzy still is how a very advanced simulation of, say, a surgical procedure
Yes.
is a game. I mean, there's nothing I've heard yet that tells me someone is playing a game.
Right.
They are in fact performing a procedure in a simulated environment.
Right.
which I need to know why it's a game.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. And that's a definition I may need help with. And I'll continue to go here, and we'll see if we can explain in a little more detail as we go through the slides. Enabling technologies. Again, I mentioned, real-time in vivo tissue property management. That's the replacement of the animal model with simulation or gaming, if it can be integrated into that. Haptics, tissue tool interactions.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Define haptics.
Haptics. Basically, it's feedback. You're in a virtual world, and I've got a scalpel, and as I'm making an incision in this virtual world, this scalpel is providing feedback that I can feel when the blade touches the skin, because I'm getting resistance from the scalpel. And as I go through the various layers of skin, I'm actually feeling it. I'm feeling the blade go through those layers, and that's something that Dr. Alan Liu at the National Simulation Center has worked extensively with on haptic feedback and surgical simulators, and that it's kind of disturbing, if you will, if you're not a surgeon, to be in that environment and make the incision, and it's like, yes, I can feel it going through the different layers of the dermis and into the muscle tissue.
Now, when that's occurring, is it doing it on a model as well, or is this? I've heard things like alternating magnetic waves that can resist a certain point in space.
Okay.
Is that what that's talking about? Are you actually resisting with magnetic forces on the
No, the scalpel actually has force feedback built into it. So I believe it's a mechanical resistance that as you're holding it, that you actually feel. But it's in conjunction with what you're visualizing. It's just the scalpel.
And it's a physical scalpel.
It's a physical scalpel, yes. But you're feeling it go through the various layers of skin. And so that's haptics. And one of the things also is, looking at, as we develop our simulations, games, having a feedback into a learning management system, so that we can capture this and use it for credentialing of our clinicians is something that we're interested in, and how do you capture the metrics from a game showing success at a task, and then convert that into an actual learning objective that has been where the student has excelled. And we continue on other enabling technologies, being immersed into a medical simulation. You have your visual, you have your tactile, but then you even have the olfactory requirements or benefits that, you're in an OR. One of the things that you're going to be exposed to is the wonderful smells of the human body, as you open the cavity, and they're indicators of different health or different diseases that may exist.
How are you simulating the olfactory? Do you just have a little Glade air freshener with medical smells you put out?
Basically, that's it. Yeah, at the appropriate time. Yeah, they've actually used that in medical simulations for disaster response as well. You'll have an immersive environment where it's kind of like a shoot building, but it's a disaster building, and you'll have fallen structures, and you'll have your first responders going into these fallen structures, and smell is very much a component of that, trying to locate your casualties. Yes, sir.
Is sound also part of the resources that you manage?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very much so. That the simulations having no sound versus having sound are night and day. That whenever we were running our simulator center there at Fort Gordon, we started off, it was just a very sterile environment. It looked like the ward over at any major medical center. And the students would come in and they would interact with the simulators, and they would go through the numbers and go through the process, but they would leave and they would just have a very minimal learning experience. We then moved it to another building, and we completely camouflaged the interior of the building. We put sandbags up all around, the various workstations. And then we had surround sound brought in of combat noises. And we brought in a training iteration. The first training iteration we brought in was a reserve unit that had been over in theater and in the theater before, and they came back and they had their training requirements. So they were going through the training session, and as one of the medics was working on his simulator patient, the sound started going and the lights were flashing, and he threw up his hands and I gotta go. I got to go, and left the building. He was a PTSD patient, and the similarity to what he had seen in theater was enough to drive him out of the building. Which that's exactly what we wanted, is to be able to not to have that young man go through the stress, although I did identify him as requiring some treatment, but to be able to put the medics and healthcare providers in a simulated environment so that as they're treating these patients, they're treating them in a somewhat realistic environment, even though it was completely simulated.
You simulate the expression of painful reaction as well on the simulated?
Absolutely. That the patients scream, moan, talk in silly ways if they're, maybe under a medication that would, inhibit good judgment. That the patients actually, the simulators will speak to you. Their lips don't move, but they still speak. We saw this slide before. Again, congressionals, SBIRs, STTRs, augmentation funding in the MT and the AFSIN. What we use as tools for this are cooperative agreements and contracts. If we have a requirement for, if you have won a STTR and it's a contract, it's very simple. This is the deliverable. We do give you a contract to deliver that, and you deliver it at the end of the period of performance. Cooperative agreements, it may be something we're exploring, and we're not sure where the end point is. We have an idea, but we're going to be working with you collaboratively to develop that tool or that widget, whatever it is we're buying. How to determine which one is appropriate for you. Basically, congressionals are very limited these days, but as we go through this, you'll see we manage congressionally supported research. Everyone in this room is a constituent or a congressional member. We, as government officials, we cannot get involved with seeking dollars or influencing Congress. As a matter of fact, I can talk to my congressman as Ed, but as Ed, part of TATRIC, I could say hello, I could shake his hand, but I cannot influence him to put dollars towards any particular project. It's actually forbidden. Now, this contact number here, Mr. Tony Story, he is our congressional liaison at TATRIC, and he is the one who could help point you in the right direction, or having your congressman possibly consider funding it from the federal budget. this is what I've been, this is a story that I tell all the time, the broad agency announcements. They are advertised on a regular basis. I believe that actually 11/1, that was actually fiscal year 11, which ended September 30th. We're actually in the fiscal year 12. So you'll look out on the broad agency announcement at MRMC's website, and it'll be 12-1. But that's where it's going to list all the current opportunities that you can bid on. That once you create a proposal, it is scientifically reviewed. Under medical research and material economy, that is something that as you're applying for anything that may be posted under the broad agency announcement, there needs to be a research component to it. That looking at a product that is going to be at the end of it, that's fine, but there has to be a research component to it. That how to get there, basically, go to do a Google search of U.S. MRMC funding opportunities, and you'll take you there. And it will be this web address here, usamra.army.mil, BAA. That's the best one to get to. There's some basic rules, pre-proposals. If you see something that your group or company can produce for the Army or for the DoD, it starts with a pre-proposal. And if it's selected as something that the DoD wants to find out more about, then we'll ask for a full proposal, and that's submitted through grants.gov, and then that would be competed with other recipients or other people who are applying for the same funding. This is what I just mentioned. A research hypothesis is absolutely a requirement. You have to have a hypothesis where you're going to end up with new knowledge, basically as a result of your study. If there's an existing process in place and you can add metrics to that, prove it, that's research. Out of this whole slide, that one of the things that you hear people talk oftentimes about the government process from filing the pre-proposal to actually ending up with an award and dollars can be very lengthy, and it is. And the Office of Research Protection, that is our policeman, if you will, who ensure that we make sure that all of our research is being conducted appropriately. It's a Human Research Protection Office at Fort Detrick, and Dr. Jeffrey Stevenson, he is an expert in his field, and if you're going to be applying for one of these broad agency announcements and you do not have a research coordinator, this says hire one. Or if there's a way that you can gain the knowledge, highly recommended, because research protocols are very complex. They've got to have certain information. You've got to have certain assurances. You've got to have permissions. You've got to route it through institutional review boards, IRBs, record for the research that's going to be conducted. So, just a consideration that research coordinators typically have that training, and you don't have to actually hire them full time. Have them come in and set it up for you, and then have them on a consultative basis. But it is a very complex process, and I agree with the slide in that you need to buy a research coordinator's time, at least a snippet of it. SBIRs, STTRs, I mentioned this before. It's across the board, coming out of Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, Transportation, as well as other major organizations within the federal government. This is the way it starts. You end up with a topic that's published typically on from the Medical Research and Material Command's perspective. It's going to come out as a topic. We write the topics oftentimes. Phase 1, about $150,000 for a 6-month feasibility study. But then if it turns to be successful, phase 2 funding is more significant, up to $1 million over 2 years. And phase 3, that is the commercialization, which the program of record, as I mentioned, that's taking it across that valley of death where so many ideas. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but there's no one who's willing to pick it up for commercialization or as a program of record, and it just stops at the end of the research. And you hate to see that, but unless we can come up with a bona fide requirement within the DoD, or it's a viable product for marketing or for selling in the local economy, that's it. Bye-bye. So that there is no SBIR funds that goes to a phase 3. That's where if it were a program of record, that tool would be brought into under the Army umbrella. There would be a contract let, and that becomes actually, like our Humvees and everything else. It becomes one of our tools that is bought and it's palmed for. It goes into the budget every year, and that's where everyone wants to be. With whatever their capability is, take it into a program of record for DoD. Some historical funding that we've done over the years. 2009, latest year that we have numbers for. Basically, phase 1, phase 2. Phase 2, obviously, you can see the dollar amount is much greater because that's the awards up to $1 million. This is across the board what we have funded. You see simulation and health training technologies, 94 phase 1 awards. Phase 2 awards, 41. So it's an area that the DoD is definitely, in particular MRMC, Medical Research and Material Command, has funded extensively.
What's the time frame of those?
The first phase is.
No, I mean, all those projects kind of in the last 2 years or 10 years?
This is actually since 2001.
And the next slide?
Say again?
That was the other slide. It was just those.
Oh, these. I think it's over the entire 10 years as well. Yeah, we started funding simulation training technologies in 97. I believe was the first one we funded, and they've been ongoing ever since. We actually work with. There's an office called the Program Executive Office for Simulation Training. PEO strike. Program Executive Office for Simulation Training and Instrumentation. They're in Orlando, Florida, and they work very closely with the FSU that's right there. It's right. Say again.
University of Central Florida. FSU's in Florida.
Yeah. University of Central Florida, that's it. And there's a VA there that is actually going to be opening one of the largest medical simulation centers right in, I think it's going to be called the Virtual ICU in the Orlando VA. So their VA is also funding simulation as well, not just DoD, which you think DoD and VA, there's joined, but they have separate pots of money. This is where you can go to look at the SBIR's request for proposals. website, current solicitations, and get on the list server for those. Augmentation funds, this is what I mentioned. We have access, at one time we had access to a fair amount of money. Those dollars have decreased as the amount of funding from the federal budget. These are the ones that did not fit into the SBIR or the congressional funding, but we would make awards up to $250,000. And this is also an opportunity to submit through the pre-proposal at the law prior to the announcement. So, that 12 to 24 months period of execution, but again, it's going to be competing against everyone else who's submitting through the BA, and it goes through the proposal review board, it goes through a review by the American Institute of Biological Sciences for scientific relevance. So things to consider as you're applying for these dollars. AMT, I mentioned that before, that if you have a member of DoD Medical who you can partner with, that person can be the principal investigator, and they can apply for the dollars. If you have a clinician that's working in one of the military treatment facilities that you partner with, then that's your key in trying to get into the AMT funding stream. And some more, you can see it's across the board, everything from teledermatology to the signal corps evaluation of their bandwidth for our diagnostic imaging systems. And really, this is a different area that don't really need to go into. That I really wanted to cover what we've done as far as simulation. The AVSIM, it's currently being developed. It's not quite there yet. So, based on anything else, do I have any questions from the group? What we've discussed so far?
So I've heard a great deal of talk about, you do a great deal of live sims.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question we alluded to earlier is, and you sort of alluded to it, do you know of any specific gamification or game features you've been adding to increase learning? Because there's inherently learning in practice, where you're sitting there and you're cutting someone open and you see bones and organs and just memorizing everything and experiencing it. But have you been explicitly, or do you know you guys explicitly adding game features into your training simulators in order to increase learning, increase retention, or even just having people have fun makes them learn more in general?
Well, there's a simulation, a game, where we have, I'm not sure if it's completely developed yet or not, but it's teaching medics how to choose between being a shooter or being a medic. And it's kind of like a virtual Iraq. It's a first-person shooter almost, in that they're going into a combat engagement, and they're medics, they're shooters as well. And one of their squad will get hit, but they're still being engaged by the enemy. So it causes a decision point of, okay, do I engage the enemy with my weapon, or do I take care of John? And that's the decision point that they got, and it's actually interactive games that they are using for training the medics specifically. So there is the gaming component. Another area that we're looking at is games that would enhance the maintenance of skills for our clinicians with subspecialties. Surgeons go into theater and they may have a subspecialty of a pediatric neurosurgeon, and they go into the theater and they're thrown in and they're a general surgeon. They're going to be doing surgery on any pediatric neurosurgery patients, and obviously, But whenever you have a mass casualty, they're going to be treating all the patients that come in through the emergency room. They're going to be hitting the OR. They're going to be treating the adults, doing major surgeries, and the fine motor skills that those surgeons require for their subspecialty, they may not have a patient that fits that category for their entire deployment. So that's what we're looking at, creating games where they can actually be in a virtual world and using haptics to practice those fine motor skills that for maintenance of certifications. But it would be all game. There would not be a simulator at all. Now, we have many other simulators. Part task trainers. If you're a OBGYN, they may have a female pelvis there for your simulation that you can use in theater. If you're a orthopedic specialist, they may have a part task trainer that is just dealing with a knee replacement, that you can use. But those are physical simulations. The gaming side, that's where we're looking for the more fine motor skills. Good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Yes?
I think a question kind of relating to what he was saying was, have you thought of maybe putting in these games that you have ways of, I don't want to say so much keeping score, but giving a person a score on their precision or their ability or how quickly they've managed to do this and not, fail.
Right.
And then so that they can compare it either against other people or against each other, against themselves, so they can get better. Maybe enjoy it, give rewards of some kind. Say,
Sure.
Have you thought of doing things like that, or?
Well, whenever we're looking at the measurement of competence, that's if you success. Your reward is if you successfully save the patient. And with the medical side, so much of it is geared towards successfully treating your patient. That is a win. That's your gold star. The one thing I've been, we're actually working on this with one of our projects now, is being able to put clinicians into a scenario where they're getting trained in a new skill set, and it's going to be hooked to a learning management system on the back end. And having that data go in is going to be certifying that Ed Kensinger as an Army medic has been trained in this skill set, and it's been validated here, and I'm going to be required to train on that in 3 months because it's a skill set that's outside the norm. And that reminder is going to come out at LMS telling me. But has there been any work in the gaming industry that is working with LMS's learning management systems to gather the data out of there for training and for maintenance of skills? Does anyone here know if that's actually been accomplished? The combining of games and LMSs? Sir?
Our company does it on the education side, higher education.
Okay.
Our games all knows web service and talk to learning management systems. So you're exactly right. They're extracting data from the LMS so you know who the person is.
Right.
And then they can record a lot of the games are great at collecting data. They can push a lot of that data back to the LMS so you can snapshot that person. That can be used for certification or can be used for remediation if they need more work in certain areas because the game shows that they're not doing as well. They can inform that as well.
Excellent. Okay. That's great. Ma'am, you have that thing?
Oh, he just answered the question.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
From an employee motivation perspective, a lot of non-tangible rewards provide tremendous reinforcement and repetition of behavior. It'd be interesting to build into some of these simulations, attaboys and nice job and things like that, and to track those.
Right.
Because we all like to hear that in the work environment. It'd be interesting to build that into a simulated environment as well.
I actually sat through a session yesterday, and I'm learning like you guys are here. That I sat through a session with Curtis Murphy yesterday, and his discussion of the flow and being able to get into that Zen-like state and be able to be one with the game, but also you're learning, you're achieving, and being able to become certified. That, I think that's a challenge that we have with some of our games that we have in DoD currently, is, that does it reach the level of fidelity that our target audience is used to? Because 18 to 34-year-old, 35-year-old, that's our war fighters, and so a lot of them are gamers, and they're out there playing the #1 games coming on the street, and for us to present to them a game that does not have that fidelity, are we going to get the devotion to it that they're going to have to their first-person shooter game that's sitting on their Xbox? Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point to build on that. What Curtis was saying yesterday about the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and the motivators who are out there. One of the things I think we have to look at is games have a specific connotation or context, whereas simulation has a specific connotation or context.
Right.
What's happening here with this type of simulation is this is real life everyday skill
Right.
that they're going to be doing and they can practice.
Right.
Whereas gaming has a connotation that it may not be. It may be something that I can learn, but it may be a fun aspect as well. So if we can incorporate all of that into some of the simulation and go that way, I think it would definitely help, but still maintain that contextual balance.
Right.
As we talk. Curtis was also saying that if you give a reward so many times,
Right.
you're going to get bored with it.
Yes.
Yes. And that's one of the things we also have to look at. And I think simulation fixes that connotation, as opposed to the game. And I think we walk a very fine line when we talk about serious games, games for health, and that kind of thing, when we're talking about these things.
I agree, and that with the marketplace exploding, you go to these GameStops, go to the gaming industry for the products that are currently available, and it's almost you wonder if there's a way that if you can take a commercial off-the-shelf game that exists and then apply the learning objectives or extract the learning objectives from that game that's already been created. It's economically viable. There's some company doing very well with it, but then you overlay your learning objectives on top of it. That way, they're going to be playing the game because they love it. But now they have these skill sets that you tie in a learning management system and integrate those two. And if the user, if the game player, is able to successfully execute certain tasks within that existing game, then they have successes. You mentioned that you were working with the Army?
Yeah, the Army Game Studio.
For what game?
A variety of them. They're mostly military simulators.
Okay.
There's a lot of driving military simulators working with and MRAPs.
Okay.
For instance, and there's also we work on 4 other host products for containment control and things like that.
Are you using any games that are commercially off the shelf?
We use Unreal Tournament 3.
Okay.
We use the Unreal Tournament 3 developer SDK, the source development kit, to develop all our games. And we use a lot of those game mechanics built in, such as the scoreboard and the way to measure metrics for accuracy for a gunner. We build a lot of those in. And those games inherently have instant feedback, because when you shoot someone, they die, and you know how many rounds it took to shoot them because you shot those rounds.
Right.
So they're getting instant feedback in that way.
Okay.
But we also notice in a lot of our games is because we build them so we're basically a whole bunch of gamers making games for soldiers, and we tap into the fact that our market is also mostly gamers. So a lot of the usability of our control sets and things are already very familiar to them, because a lot of the skills they use in Gears of War also convert to our collective skills training that we use to teach convoy training for Humvee platoons.
Okay.
So they already know how to use that gamepad joystick. The learning curve has already been there is no learning curve because they instinctively know trigger buttons are shoot. They instinctively know joystick is how I steer and look around, and so it becomes very natural. So as opposed to using like a keyboard and mouse, which is more that's a little bit harder.
Right.
So a lot of those game mechanics we actually use to our advantage. The gaminess of our game sometimes works to our advantage.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback on what you were saying earlier, I work, I'm the editor of Games for Health, which is a new peer-reviewed publication, and we're soliciting papers and so on. One of the things that we found is that the industry is so new that we don't have any longitudinal studies. We have, for example, several examples of where people have used Wii Fit for 6 to 8 years old and demonstrated that over a period of 3 months that they can improve the physical fitness of it. But so far, we don't have any papers that shows over 3 years that they have, the kids have grabbed onto it and stayed fit.
Right.
And so I think that that's the part of the nascent state of the development of games and really where we are. It's going to be very interesting to see how it is, how games will evolve so that you can keep people engaged in them over long periods of time to enable longitudinal studies.
Absolutely. I completely agree. That looking at gaming has been around for quite a while, and looking at different disease states such as Alzheimer's, PTSD. Dr. Hurst?
Yeah.
You've done some work in that area, haven't you, sir?
Yeah, I've done work with Parkinson's patients
Yes.
and trying to brain injury and things like that. And yeah, there aren't any longitudinal studies at this point. Second, primarily due to the lack of funding that's available for those types of things. We can get small amounts of funding, like mine are usually anywhere from 2 to 6 months, depending on where we're at. And I've been able to show that in the acute stage in 30 days, using the Wii, that Parkinson's patients increase their quality of life, decrease depression to 0, and also decrease their symptoms. In that period of time. However, I don't have the resources in order to do a longitudinal study at this point. In order to do that, part of the reason is I can't get published, which now hopefully that will change.
We're very happy to hear. Whenever you mention that, I'm sitting here thinking, Dr. Hurst.
It's a whole new world.
The thing is, with longitudinal studies, you also need the large amount of population. You also need multi-site, and those kind of things. And NIDR and NIH, unless you're published, you're not going to get an R1.
Right.
Unless you have stuff to build on it. I mean, we can go through and look at alternative funding, such as I'm working with Ed for Patrick and a few other things that are out there, especially for the military or the VA or the DoD, in order to do that. But again, they're not necessarily looking for the longitudinal stuff at this point because they're reactive to what's going on.
I would guess part of the difficulty of that too is if you've got a terminal disease, what type of longitudinal study can you do?
Right. I have that difficulty with the ALS,
Exactly.
ALS population because it's terminal disease 2 to 4 is what they're going to survive. So I use games with them for diversional type things and for quality of life, as well as accessibility type issues. So there's a variety of different ways you can go and a variety of different ways you can look at things. But, unless the funding's out there, funding resources and things like that. We can do a very small study, very small longitudinal study, but then I lack the end to really solidify it in other areas.
That's one of the things we're also hoping to do in the journal is to, as we get smarter and better network, funding opportunities, grant opportunities, those kinds of things would become part of the publication so that we can facilitate the growth of the field as well as to share successes.
Absolutely, and that being able
At
to.
Marion League, we have a journal of adolescent and young adult oncology.
Now, this is for people in the group of 15 to 39, and they have everything to live for.
Right.
So there's a lot of research that's going on in that area. So perhaps in that area, some games can be interspersed. That's a very hot area, y'all.
Right.
And maybe some games can be interspersed, and research can be obtained. Because this is 15 to 39, and these people have the will to survive, and with the proper therapies, they will survive, and we will counter that.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned 15 to 39 area, because the same percentage of gamers for 15 to 26, I think it is the same for 50 to 65. You have the same percentage of gamers in those populations. And now, yes, there's been a white paper done by 107, 108. Anyway, Able Gamers and another company have done that. The white paper's on the Able Gamers website if you want to read that. But again, going back to what we're talking about, it's all a matter of where's the funds, where are the things that we can do. I mean, because we lack the resources in order to do that. And going back to what you were asking about the motivation and the learning and things that are in there, behavioral psych and psychology has done a lot with gaming and looking at motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But the other thing is that you have to look at everybody's different, and everybody's going to find something else motivating about that. Where going back to the contextual thing that we were talking about, simulation is my job, is what I do. It's the skills that I have.
But that, I think, is inherently intrinsic motive.
Exactly.
Because it's the job they chose that they do all the time.
Exactly. And they're doing it with that simulation. And there are people who would kill to do that. The civilian people. That's why first-person shooter games are so successful.
Yeah.
They want to do it, but they don't want to be there. And that's something that we need to look at. And how do we put all that together?
Yeah, and also before we, I did want to make a mention because I felt this kind of got unaddressed, and I kind of skipped over when you talked to me about it, about using off-the-shelf products, market products as trainers in order to meet this expectation of quality.
Right.
And there was one study done in, I'm going to call it 2007 or 2008, and it was a study for medical professionals who would do remote or outpatient surgery.
Right.
And they used a game called Super Monkey Ball. And Super Monkey Ball is a game super fast-paced, bright color, score points, it goes a mile a minute, and you're using joysticks in order to control your character. And what they did, and they did a pretty comprehensive study with, I think, 200 or 300 surgeons over the course of like a year, and they had them play Super Monkey Ball 4 hours a week, and it reduced the amount of errors they made in surgery by 80%. And it was just because they increased their hand-eye coordination with joysticks, and because those same skills carried over. But I think it was so successful because it wasn't a surgery simulator. It was made purely for fun, and it just happened to tap on the same skill set. So I think there's also, and something I would like to see more of, and I think it's just not happening because I think serious games are so young that people have a hard time taking. Like, I think Super Monkey Ball, for a certain skill set, if you're learning to, if you have to professionally use joysticks, a really silly game like Super Monkey Ball, it's as silly as the name is a very serious trainer for that one skill set.
Right. I think laparoscopic surgery.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I criticize my field for. I'm an occupational therapist. And we do not use games to their full potential. We have eye-hand coordination, we have visual perception, we have fine motor coordination. We have all these different things that we can use, and off-the-shelf games. And I use primarily off-the-shelf games.
Yeah, I mean,
the study that you're talking about, I know that MUSC was involved with that. Cobb and I don't know, it was an Asian gentleman who did a research study, said that skills that are gained through video games can carry over to other applications because those skills tend to remain.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I did with a TBI patient was I was doing reaction time using the Wii, playing sports. She was trying to improve her driving. Now 60 feet, which is 3/4 of a second, is normal stopping time. After 3 weeks of playing that, she went from 85 feet to 57 feet on the average. So, so the proof is out there and the efficacy is out there. It's a matter of being able to show that. Long term is the other issue. Now, if she stopped playing, did she do worse, or did it stay? Well, with the traumatic brain injury, what we're finding is that there's it takes a very, very long time due to neuro re-ed and repetition in order to keep that.
Right.
Whereas with the healthy individual, it may be, steady.
But I would argue an off-the-shelf game is better than a lot of people make custom games for a custom problem.
They're not gonna play it.
They won't continue to
Exactly.
play. I'll still hop on and play ping pong on my
Right.
Wii, but I am not going to hop on my stopping at a traffic light simulator.
Exactly. My Parkinson's patients will not play a game that's specifically designed for Parkinson's because they want to play what everybody else plays.
Right.
They want to play with their grandkids.
And they also
That's
don't
one
want
of
to be
the things
reminded that they have Parkinson's all the time.
Exactly. And the other thing is dare I say it, but video games such as the Wii, such as the Kinect, such as the Move, are bringing families a little bit closer together because everybody can play it and everybody can bring it across. And it's a universal language, I guess you want to say, for all of this. And the applications are enormous, both military, both civilian, medical, whatever. And I think, as Bill was saying earlier, now is the time to jump on it because, that's where we're at. I'm considered an early pioneer. Okay, and I started in 2007. Okay, so
It's a great time to be a pioneer.
yeah,
6 months of work, you're a pioneer.
exactly. I feel very old because of that. But I mean, it's those kinds of things. I'm getting real excited about this because I'm really passionate about it. The future of healthcare is in virtual reality and in serious gaming. Because what technology is only going to increase in advance. The question is, how do we mold that and make that what we need it to be? Because in medicine, it should never be that the technology is what you do. It should always be to enhance what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
And something I would love to see is for us to stop calling it serious gaming and just start calling it gaming. Because I think that's holding us back artificially.
Yeah, I heard out when people were talking about serious gaming, they were making jokes about it.
But I tell you what, there is a constituency, there is part of our American public that if you were to say the word gaming, they would think that you're betting on horses.
Right,
Exactly.
right,
That may
right.
be.
But how so that shrink
I realize that your generation has a different definition of that. But if you were to talk to some large percentage of the population about what gaming is, it's playing slot machines and betting.
Right, it's going to
Sure,
be.
gaming will review, and it's about actual gambling.
So that's why we've been very careful to refer to it as health games or games for health.
Right.
Just to let you know how the Army looks at gaming, I tried to access the Siege site from my Army computer on the Army base,
That's Mark's games.
and it's marked as
Yeah.
games, and it blocked me from it. I had to go home to my house to register to be a speaker.
I had to fill out a form. I work in a game studio, and I have to fill out a host of forms just to go to game sites so I can do my job.
Sometimes
So-
have issues with you going to Yahoo.
But
Oh yeah.
this is all part of the development of the field. We come up with standard terms and the experts will come up and gradually the definitions will evolve and so on. But right now, there's baggage from an earlier era that we have to deal with.
There is that. It's just like telemedicine. Telemedicine has negative connotations out in the world, and like I oftentimes refer to my colleagues, I let them know that telemedicine was when it was in its infancy, but now it's just an extension of the practice of medicine. They're practicing medicine using the technological tools that are available. Dermatology, radiology, two of the most prominent ones we use for telemedicine application. Radiologists don't do telemedicine. They read films. And the fact that they're sitting in their living room in their skivvies and their bunny slippers, that's fine.
Yeah.
But that used to be telemedicine.
The rations, the same over Skype.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm going to conclude with that, and I really appreciate everyone's
Thank you.
discussion and interaction.
We hope you found this recorded session informative. If you're an established or aspiring game developer in the state of Georgia, we invite you to become a member of the GGDA in order to participate in our monthly networking and educational programs and to experience Siege firsthand. Information on becoming a member and attending chapter meetings can be found at ggda.org. Information on Siege can be found at siegecon.net. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll come back for the next episode of the Georgia Game Developers Association's official podcast. Music for this program was provided by Professor Shy Guy. For the GGDA, I'm Cecilia Holman.